In 2018, our Asian adventure took in Bangkok, Hanoi, Halong Bay, Hue, Hoi An, Trang, Ho Chi Minh City, the Meekong River Delta, and Krabi. We flew into the Thai city of Bangkok. We arrived in the afternoon after a long flight, so we relaxed on the hotel's terrace watching the river traffic. On our second day, we awoke to grey skies and rain. We made our way down to the river and jumped on a river taxi to the Wat Arun Temple. The Temple of Dawn with its stunning towers that are covered in colourful Chinese ceramics. We had a cooling drink before hopping back on the water taxi and heading over to Chinatown. Here we enjoyed lunch at a basic roadside cafe. We explored the streets and came across a hidden temple where a ceremony was taking place. We took another water taxi and spent the late afternoon enjoying the sights along the river. We finished the day with a meal overlooking the Grand Palace. From Bangkok, we flew to Hanoi in Vietnam. Now, we've all seen cities with busy traffic, but Hanoi takes it to a different level. It's utterly crazy with seemingly no rules or lane control. But somehow it works, even with all those scooters on the road. On our second day, we joined a tour of the city with our guide Bay and our driver Trang, and the only other guests were three lovely girls from Belgium. Our first stop was the impressive Ho Chi Minh Mausoleum. We then moved on to the Presidential Palace with its koi carp lake and impressive gardens. Our next stop was a workshop that produced handmade tiles using lacquer and inlays of duck egg and mother of pearl. This process was absolutely fascinating, and the finished products were simply superb. Our next stop was the Ngok Son Temple, where our guide remarked that Mandy and I had 3 beautiful daughters. Well, we just looked at each other and burst into giggles. All too soon, it was time to say goodbye to our new friends, as we boarded cyclos to be driven through the chaotic traffic of the old quarter back to our hotel, after a hugely entertaining and informative day. The following day, we left Hanoi and headed east to the port of Halong. We joined the Royal Palace cruise boat for our overnight tour of the world-famous Halong Bay. On boarding, we had a lovely surprise of being told that we'd been upgraded to a deluxe suite, of which there were only 2 on board. Leaving port, we cruised out into the bay and found ourselves surrounded by the huge limestone rock formations that seemed to grow out of the sea. Our first stop was the island of Toe Top, where a fairly steep climb brought you to a viewing point that had dramatic views of the bay. On our second day, we arrived at the island of Sung Sot, and we took a tender ashore to visit Surprising Cave. An impressive 3-chamber complex with some unusual rock formations. We then returned to the main boat, and we were given a lesson on how to make the local spring rolls. And believe me, it's not as easy as Chung made it look. Returning to Hanoi, we flew down to the city of Hue, which took just over an hour. Our day started with a tour of the city of Hue. Our first stop was the 7-story Fain Mai Pagoda, which is one of the most ancient pagodas in Hue City. Next, we boarded a dragon boat for a relaxing cruise down the Perfume River. We then visited the impressive Imperial Citadel, which houses the Royal Temple and the Forbidden City. This huge complex has so much ancient history, and we were grateful for our guide who gave us such interesting information about the various aspects of the citadel. Lunch was served in a beautiful traditional Vietnamese restaurant and again consisted of 7 courses. The afternoon continued and began with a visit to the burial site of Emperor Minh Mang and Kai Ding Tung. Our final stop was at an incense and conical hat workshop in a small local village. Rob had a go at rolling his own incense stick, but it was a really poor result and brought howls of laughter from the locals. All too soon we said goodbye to our guide He and our fellow travellers as we made our drive from Hue to Hoi An. From Hue we drove down to Hoi An and we checked into the impressive Vinh Hung Riverside Resort. Which is set in lush gardens on the banks of the Thu Bon River. On our arrival at reception, the staff presented Mandy with a lovely birthday cake. Our first day in Hoi An started with a morning stroll into the old town and a stop for a refreshing glass of lemongrass tea. We then walked to the local market, which was a hive of activity. We continued our walk along the riverfront before having a lovely lunch of snapper fish served on a banana leaf. In the afternoon, our hotel laid on a tasting event of the local cuisine, cooked freshly by the local people. We then boarded the hotel's local riverboat for a sunset cruise, which also gave us views of a local boat building yard and the local life along the river. In the evening, the town is lit up by thousands of coloured lanterns, as families and visitors alike come down to the river to explore the markets, the bars and the cafes. The river was awash with paper envelopes containing candles that were given respect to the locals' ancestors. The riverfront and the bridges were beautifully lit up and cast amazing ripple effect over the water. The following day we took the short drive over to An Bang Beach. We took a stroll along this beautifully kept beach, but the water was extremely cold. We had lunch and then relaxed and watched the local fishermen at work. All too soon it was time to say goodbye to this truly magical town of Hoi An. From Hoi An, we jumped on a plane and flew down to the city of Nha Trang. We dropped off our bags and headed to the beachside waterfront. From the active beachfront, we walked back to the city centre and had a tasty meal at the local restaurant. This restaurant had a huge variety of fresh fish and the seafood was still alive in tanks outside on the pavement. On our second day in Nha Trang, we made our way over to the Vinh Pearl Island of entertainment. You reach the island by way of a 3,200 metre cable car, the longest over open sea. The views from the cable cars are quite dramatic as the cargo ships pass beneath you. Vinh Pearl is packed with attractions, including roller coasters, a huge aviary with a vast variety of birds, an outdoor zoo, botanical gardens, a man-made beach, a Japanese garden, and many more activities to fill the day. Joined an old sailing junk operated by Emperor Cruises and set sail out of the bay towards the South China Sea. The inside of the junk was elaborately decorated with armchairs, sofas and a splendid dining room. Our first stop was the island of Hon Mun, where we transferred by speedboat to a hidden cove with a beach set up for our arrival. After a few hours of sunbathing, swimming and the odd tiger beer, we returned to the junk for lunch. We then relaxed on the sun deck with beautiful mountains surrounding us before setting sail to our next stop, Hon Mui, where we visited a local floating fishing village where they still use the old conical boats. We then set sail for Nha Trang with the wind blowing through our hair. From Nha Trang we flew down to Ho Chi Minh City, where once again we encountered the chaotic traffic, but we also enjoyed the green open spaces of this huge city. We began with a tour of the city with our guide Hang. Our first stop of the day was the impressive Reunification Palace, the working and administrative building of the old South Vietnamese government. The tanks that smashed through the palace gates in the early 70s are still in the grounds. Our second stop was the hugely impressive Notre Dame Cathedral. This is a beautiful building, but sadly on our visit it was closed for restoration. We then crossed the road to the famous old post office building that was built by the French in the late 19th century, and it's still a working post office to this very day. We then moved on to the War Remnants Museum, dedicated to Vietnam's war against the USA. There is a display of captured American military hardware in the grounds, including tanks, helicopters and planes. But it's inside the museum that really brings home the horrific loss that this country suffered. In the evening, we made our way over to the Saigon Opera House to see a production of the O Show, a cross between dance, drum, drama, ballet and comedy, a highly impressive show. The following day, we took the 2-hour drive to the Meekong Delta region with our guide, Bean. Our first stop was Unicorn Island and a visit to a natural chocolate workshop where we watched the various stages of production before tasting the finished products. We then sailed up a small tributary called the Thoi Son to our lunch destination. The main course was called elephant fish and was prepared at our table by a young Vietnamese lady. After lunch, we visited a place called Coconut Island, where they produced a number of goods made out of coconut, including delicious ice cream and a potent drink. After lunch, we continued to sail along the Meekong River to see how the local people live their lives. The next day, we were back on the river and headed towards Kai Rang Floating Market. This market has a huge variety of goods on sale, and we took the opportunity to try the fresh pineapple. After a long day, we headed back to our hotel in Can Tho. While we were driving to the hotel, we heard that the Vietnamese under-23 football team had won a match on a penalty shootout, and when we arrived in the city, it was total bedlam. Thousands of people were on the streets celebrating, and the noise from the car horns was quite deafening. We left Ho Chi Minh City and flew out to Singapore and then on to Krabi in Thailand. We spent a relaxing day on Onang Beach watching the long-tail boats at work. In the evening we walked down to the Golden Beach Resort where they were holding a Thai party night. The first performers were a group of traditional menorah dancers, 6 beautifully dressed young ladies dancing to local music. Next up were a couple of young lads demonstrating Thai boxing, actually quite a brutal bout with no punches being pulled. Early the next morning, we drove to the local pier, boarded a ferry for a visit to the Phi Phi Islands. The journey across the Andaman Sea took about 1 hour 50 minutes. There are no vehicles allowed on the island, which made a pleasant change on this trip. We made our way down to the local beach for a cooling swim in the beautiful turquoise sea. We spent a few hours exploring the seafront, and it was soon time to reboard the ferry and return to Nang. In the evening, we took the short trip over to Ye's Thai Cookery School, where we learned how to make various local curries and rice dishes. And we thoroughly enjoyed eating the finished product. The next morning, we hopped onto a long-tail boat for a visit to Railay Beach. Apparently, this is the only way to access the beach. We arrived early in the morning when the beach was fairly quiet, and we spent a lovely day enjoying the wonderful views, swimming and eating fresh fruit. The following afternoon, we set sail on a Siamese junk and visited 5 islands: Poda, Tup, Taming, Wasim and Gai, and we spent the afternoon swimming and snorkeling whilst taking in the breathtaking scenery of the surrounding islands. We then dropped anchor and watched a superb sunset that brought an end to our Asian adventure.